Hi everyone. In this video, we will be discussing a topic that is somewhat different than what I normally cover in this channel, and that is how to get your first job in data science. All the tips and suggestions that I'm going to cover in this video are based on my own personal experience. And now I've been working as a data scientist for the past 9 years, and I'm based in Europe, more specifically the Netherlands. So all the advice that I'm going to be suggesting is based off of that experience. Now, in your particular situation, things might be a bit different. However, I think that the suggestions that I can offer will be of some help to you. So what will we cover in this video? First, I'm going to go over 3 key areas that you should prepare for before even starting your job search. And then afterwards, I'm going to give you some suggestions for how to actually go about obtaining that first job in data science. So without any further delay, let's jump into the video. So the 3 key areas that you should be preparing yourself for are as follows. They include having a sufficient technical background, having some domain knowledge for the particular company that you are seeking to apply to, and to have sufficient interpersonal skills. Now let's go through them one by one. The first, technical knowledge, will be a no-brainer. Data science is a heavily technical field, so you need to have sufficient knowledge to be able to do the job effectively. This includes the following. So you're going to need to have a sufficient amount of mathematical knowledge. There's a lot of statistics involved in data science, whether it is just doing a statistical analysis for a particular project or for understanding how a machine learning algorithm works. Both will require a sufficient level of statistical knowledge. Next is that you will need to know how machine learning models actually work. Now, this doesn't mean you have to memorize algorithms and equations by heart. Normally, that's not really required, but you should have a general understanding for how these algorithms function. So if you can answer questions, say like, can you explain the difference between bagging and boosting? Can you explain how gradient descent works and what it's used for? These sorts of questions will put you in a good position, and normally this is what's covered in most technical interviews. Now, any data science role will require quite a bit of programming, so you're going to need to know how to write programs, specifically in Python. That's really the core programming language that's used across different companies throughout the industry. You're going to need to know how to build applications in Python. So that's key. You're going to have to understand most likely Jupyter Notebooks, which is what is typically used during the experimentation phase for any particular project. But afterwards, you're going to want to migrate out of a notebook into a properly structured Python application. Along with that, there are a number of different packages that typically go along with any data science project. These include NumPy, Pandas, Matplotlib, scikit-learn, and there's quite a few more beyond that. And in addition, you're also going to want to have a good amount of experience with Spark. So Apache Spark is a framework for running jobs on a cluster of computers. Now, this is very important for companies where the amount of data that is available for any given project is so large that it cannot fit on a single computer. So typically what's used in this situation is to use a cluster of computers where the job that's required can be distributed across the whole network in order to get things done in a reasonable amount of time. And so another key technology that you're going to need to know about is SQL. So this is a standard database query language. And whether you're using an actual SQL database or something a bit different like Hive or Snowflake, it doesn't really matter. Usually the scripting languages are very similar to each other. It's very similar to SQL. So if you learn SQL, you are not going wrong in any way. In my experience, at least, when I have been working on projects that required processing large amounts of data and preparing it for modeling, running those jobs as a SQL script is very helpful. These jobs can execute very fast. It's very efficient for working with large amounts of data. So you're going to want to understand how SQL works. Now, one thing that will distinguish you from more of an experimentalist or an academic data scientist is that you're also going to need to know how to do software engineering. We want to move from experimenting to actually deploying our solutions in a way that can be actually used in the real world. And the way we do that is by understanding the fundamental principles of software engineering. So you're going to want to understand how a project is properly structured, how do we deploy a project, how do we maintain it. These are all key areas that you are going to need to understand. Now, one thing that I've experienced is that having some kind of exposure to at least one cloud platform can be helpful when doing your job search. So there's a lot of companies out there that have their projects run on a cloud platform, say like AWS or GCP or Azure. So having some exposure to one of these platforms can be of help to you. It's certainly very good to have at least one of those on your CV. Now, there's other technologies that we can talk about. Say, for instance, some companies deploy their models in a container, say using Docker, or you can maintain and monitor models using a framework like MLflow. So having these technologies is also helpful. It's not as critical as some of the others that I've already mentioned, such as knowing Python, SQL, and understanding how machine learning models work. For the companies that I've worked at, normally when looking at candidates, these people are all ones who have a technical background. They have a university degree in a STEM field, at least a bachelor's. So that's also something you may want to consider, is that you need to have a sufficient technical education in order to really qualify for one of these jobs. There's two other key points that you need to consider when starting to look for a data science role. The first is that you're going to need to have sufficient domain knowledge. So data science is the intersection, technical expertise with domain knowledge. You need to have both to be really effective. So for any given industry, you will need to have some kind of exposure. And really the only way to do that is through some kind of job experience. Now that can come through a what I would call a tangential role. So you're not really in data science, but you can do something a little bit related. And I'll touch on that towards the end of the video, exactly what do I mean here. But you need to consider that the domain knowledge will be an important part when considering any candidate for a data science role. The key point here is that you really want to be in a position where you can understand the common problems and pain points encountered in a given industry and how data science can meet those challenges. So that's really the reason why domain knowledge is so important. The next point I would like to discuss is interpersonal skills. And so this is something that is often overlooked, but it's really important. You need to be able to communicate effectively as a data scientist. And what do I mean by this? It means that you should be able to communicate clearly. An audience should be able to understand what you're saying without too much difficulty. You should be able to explain complex technical topics in a way to stakeholders who don't necessarily have technical knowledge, such that they are able to understand the overarching concepts. And this will be a key thing to look for during any interview process. And related to this also is the question, are you able to work effectively as a team? So this is something also that candidates are often sized up on. Will they mesh well with the team? Will they work as part of a unit? So these are all things to keep in mind. So those are the three main areas that I think anyone looking to get into data science should really emphasize and focus on. That will being strong in all three will certainly help you when looking to get that job. So how would I recommend someone actually go about to get that data science job? Well, we have to think in the long term in this case, because in data science it's often quite difficult to get an entry-level job, meaning, fresh out of school, you're going to land a job as a data scientist. Often that can be difficult. Now, some things that you can do to actually increase your chances are as follows. So the first is you can look for a data science job at a company that's located in a small town or in a more remote location. So if we're looking at a major city, typically that's where all the competition is as well. So you're going to be competing with lots and lots of people. And as somebody fresh out of school, that will be pretty difficult. Instead, you want to, so to speak, be a big fish in a small pond. And the way that you do that is by positioning yourself in a way where you have a higher chance of actually getting that job. The other thing to consider is to work for a company initially that is quite small. So I'm talking about startups that are, say, at the point where they have 10 to 15 employees. Typically, these companies don't have the resources to pay top dollar, so most of the people with a lot of experience won't even look to work at these places. However, these can be good businesses where you can gain a lot of valuable experience. Now, the last tip that I have is that you should consider working at what I would call a tangential field. And what I mean by that is work in a role that is related to data science, but not actually being a data scientist. So for example, I spent over 3 years working as a software engineer before I moved into data science. And the skills that I learned as a software engineer were actually very useful for what I do now. So that's something that you can consider, is you can go into a field such as software engineering or, for instance, data engineering. Both are good foundational steps where you can gain a lot of the experience and knowledge that I mentioned earlier in this video before making a move into data science. That's actually a pretty good way of broadening out your skill set and having a pretty solid CV for any job that you may be applying for. In addition, taking that route also gives you the domain knowledge that I mentioned earlier. So if you're working as a software engineer in a particular industry, you can work in that same industry, not necessarily at the same company, but in a related one, but then make the jump to data science and you already have that domain knowledge there. So that's already positions you very well. So that's one thing. And then just by working in a company, you can also improve a lot on your interpersonal skills, your teamwork skills, that sort of thing. So there's only upside to taking that route of working a tangential role first. And so there you have it. Those are my tips for getting a job in data science. I hope this video is of some help to you. If you got some value out of this, please like, share, and consider subscribing to the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Have a great day, good luck with your job search, and I will see you in the next video.